And principalities cannot control this man because he surrounds himself with Christians.
You say, why would our God give us a president who swears? Why would he give us a president who's had affairs with women?
And I don't think he came to be president by mistake or by happenstance. I think somehow God put him in this position. God, in some reason, put him there for a purpose. I don't know what that is.
And they're ready to put an end to this crap, as the president said. And I think it's time for us to form a resistance and do that.
There is a war in the world against God. 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 God.
Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Pod. I'm Christina Forrester. You can find me on Twitter at Christina of9.
And I'm Justin Anderson. You can find me at Newman for Life.
And follow our podcast on What WLD Jesus Pod, and you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts or on christiandims.org, where you can find the full library of our episodes and what's going on with Christian Democrats of America. Today on the show, we have author Terry Heaton. He's the author of The Gospel of Self, How Pat Robertson Stole the Soul of the GOP. And he's got some real insight on Christian Dominionism. We've had Terry on the podcast before. And he was there basically at the creation of the religious right movement. And he helped build it. And now he's exposing it. And he's got some great insight on the Pat Robertson shadow government and some of the things we've been talking about in episodes 31 and 33 of the podcast on Dominionism. So be sure and stay tuned for that interview with Terry. So last week's show, we really, it was quite striking because we had a full in-depth conversation about white supremacy, about Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. We had gone into hate and just so many topics relating to that. And if you listened to it, it was quite striking then that just 48 hours after we had recorded that episode was the tragically awful New Zealand shooting and domestic terrorism attack.
Well, I think what's striking is that we talked about specifically we talked about the violence that this type of language incites or could incite.
Exactly.
And we specifically talked about stoking angers and this type of rhetoric being a thing that people will stand on to become emboldened to commit more violence. And less than 48 hours later, there's 50 people dead, 50 more people hurt, 51 people, I think, dead now.
Yeah.
The count has risen since the initial attack. And what we got was in no way the ability to puff our chest for having some kind of scoop, but the incredible sadness that comes from knowing that we are correct and that we're following the footsteps and being able to finish out the logical steps that this takes to people of faith being hurt in a place of worship, which is nearly exactly what we talked about.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. We were exploring the way that this hate rhetoric from the president and the right, Fox News, there were so many examples we were bringing in, and how that, people look at the scarf, and we were talking about Representative Omar and the comments from Judge Janine Pirro on Fox, and how that kind of rhetoric, she's we know what she was doing, and looking at that and talking about people as savages and as terrorists, and Mexicans as rapists, and barbarians invading our country, and how that leads. And the manifesto from the shooter was all about that. It just gives me chills to think about it, but it's all about that kind of language about immigrants and
invaders.
Yeah. And he even cited our president. Our president has become a symbol for hatred and taking action of violence against that hatred across the country. It's something really sobering that we can't just move on from and just say, okay, yeah, that was last week and it was awful and now we're moved on. We can't do that.
I agree that we can't and we shouldn't, especially as a society. Anybody that follows me on Twitter knows that I retweeted a video of the Jewish community standing outside of the mosque.
Yes.
With signs saying that they stand together, and it was probably the most moving video I've ever seen on Twitter. I get tears just thinking about it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it was beautiful. And you had some responses of people who were in tears, actually, from that tweet. And that kind of thing, we need so much more of that. We need so much more of that. And right now, coming together. And we need more leaders, like the New Zealand Prime Minister. Jacinda Ardern, am I saying that correctly? I'm probably not.
I don't know.
I'm probably not.
That one I don't know.
Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand Prime Minister. She has been just an absolute light, to the world, to show this is what a leader does when there's been a tragedy in a mass scale like this in your country. And we think about so many shootings and acts of hatred we've seen here with so much inaction over just decades. And already New Zealand is taking action on gun reforms already within the week. It's done. She's like, we are doing this. This will not happen again on our soil. She's standing in solidarity with the Muslim community, even going to the lengths of wearing a scarf in public to show that solidarity. Calling out the hatred and white supremacy for what it is, showing what a real leader does. Yeah,
and I really thought that it was interesting. Someone made the point on Twitter, and forgive me, I forgot what your handle is, but someone said, I wonder if New Zealand, after this attack, looked at the United States and said, I don't want to be like the United States.
Wow. That's just sad. When I think about what America was like when I was growing up, and the way the world viewed America, the way I viewed myself as an American, and it's so proud to be an American. My best friend, who I met when I was 13, from Australia, who's living here now, Jessica Forster. She's been on the podcast before. We had met at 13, and she just was so excited to become friends with an American.
Yeah.
And that's how it was. And I actually went to visit her in Australia. And when I did, it was like I was a celebrity. I was treated like a celebrity over there. Here's my friend, the American. Everyone wanted to talk to the American. It's kind of like we are with British or Australian people here in the States. It was like, we love America. We love Americans. And you were just kind of idolized. And it's just so far gone now. It's so sad.
It really is. I believe I saw somewhere, and I don't remember if this was from Columbine in 1999 or from Sandy Hook, but since Sandy Hook, there has been thousands of mass shootings and zero actions from the government to prevent them. Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, it took one incident and a strong leader to say this is absolutely never happening again in this country.
One. And, we're going to talk about the presidential primary for the Democrats soon, but, hopefully among this just large growing amount of people, we have a leader like that that's going to stand strong. We hopefully in there, and who's going to win and who's going to stand strong. We've got to keep hope and faith alive, and who can begin to restore. The job it's going to be a huge task. That's why it's an important decision we make. And I know the process is starting very early, but it kind of needs to, because it's an important decision. This person has a lot on their shoulders to restore America in the world, and here. So we continue to pray for New Zealand, for the people at Christ Church, stand in solidarity with the community there, and all all over the world where the hatred that's spewing out of this place is affecting other places. And we need to be praying for that on a daily basis, I would say. So our president was more concerned over the weekend with a rerun of SNL and defending Judge Janine Pirro, then calling out the New Zealand terrorists. Has he even, besides just saying, our thoughts and prayers are with the people of New Zealand, he said, I don't know who that is. Last I heard, he just said, we don't know much about it. We're finding out about the guy. It's terrible. It's terrible. No calling out. Just the same as Charlottesville, same as we were talking about last week.
No, those are his peeps. I mean, yeah. That's I got no other words for it. I mean, those are his peeps. He's gonna, he's got his peeps back. It's code. It's code for go ahead. It's code for go ahead.
It's just all too obvious, isn't it? It's just, well. So to follow up from our story of last week, we talked about Judge Janine Pirro, and the comments she had made that were so inciting and such a dog whistle about Representative Omar. So Fox did pull the show last Saturday. It's just surprising. I mean, that should be maybe a sign there's some decency. There's a line that even Fox won't cross. I hope. I don't know.
No.
Maybe. Is that...
No.
Can I...
It's advertisers who are pulling out, so...
So it's all still about the bottom line.
It's still about the bottom line. So, but the good news is that capitalism is working both ways right now.
Right.
Right? So it's Fox saying, oh, well, we have to, as a company, bow down to our supporters who are pulling out financially because of this hateful rhetoric that's being spewed. And so, I mean, it in some ways it's good,
mm-hmm.
right? In some ways it's maybe we do have to make a change around here and start actually thinking about what we're putting up on our website,
right?
And on our television programs.
Yeah. I mean, there's it's kind of like what happened with after Laura Ingraham had talked about the Parkland kids, and you started seeing just advertiser after advertiser pulling out of that. So, it does work. So Trump defended her in a myriad of frantic tweeting over the weekend. I mean, you're president of the United States. I actually did think Meghan McCain made a good point after he had, just gone after, late John McCain, which is just, I mean, we're not even going to get into that. I've heard great commentary that's been talked about. It's so undignified and disgusting. But,
well, I think the only tie-in really that it has to what we're talking about now is it came in this flood of Twitter activity from the president.
This myriad of, and I like what Meghan McCain said that, basically,
you're obsessing over what you can't have.
You're obsessing over what you can't have, but also what do you, her dad used to spend his weekends with his family.
Right.
Why aren't you with your family?
Right.
Well,
her dad also had experiences that were, that would, kill mere mortals, honestly.
Oh, sure.
Sure. And I'm sure that it wasn't, I'm sure that his experiences led him to cherish many more moments in his life than Donald Trump ever thought of.
Yeah.
I honestly picture Donald Trump living exactly like Scrooge McDuck. Yeah. Like, I feel like there's a room.
Don't do that to Scrooge McDuck.
With a bunch of gold in it, and he's just swimming in it.
But
that's how he spends his time.
Scrooge McDuck had a nice gooey side. He had a nice sweet side. You don't do that to Scrooge. Don't do that to DuckTales. Woohoo.
Woo!
So, anyway, we are totally off topic. Where were we? So, frantic tweeting in which the president defended Judge Janine. Why don't you read it, Justin? Do your best Trump impersonation.
Oh, might I get to do Trump?
Do your best. This is a debut of Justin Anderson as Donald Trump. Take it away.
Bring back Judge Janine Pirro, the radical left Democrats working closely with their beloved partner, the fake news media, is using every trick in the book to silence a majority of our country. They have all-out campaigns against, at Fox News, hosts who are doing too well. You must stay strong and fight back with vigor. Stop working so hard on being politically correct, which will only bring you down, and continue to fight for our country. The losers, and they are losers, all want what you have. Don't give it to them. Be strong and prosper. Be weak and die.
Woo!
So terrible.
Okay.
Such terrible language. Such telebril verbiage. He's a dick.
Be strong and
I
prosper.
I can't even.
Be strong. Is he a
jerk.
Vulcan? Be strong and prosper.
Yeah,
I can't-
exactly.
But you need to send that clip to SNL, dude. Yeah, definitely. That's a great. No, yeah, you got to send that in. That's your audition tape right,
Right.
there. Yeah. So yeah, this.
I mean, it's
the
a
whole thing was
throwback.
so disgusting.
It's a throwback, and his analogies, his be strong and prosper, be weak and die, all that
Be
stuff.
weak and die.
all
Oh
that,
my gosh.
like as if that's exactly how the world works. So let's just take that last sentence: be strong and prosper, be weak and die. That is absolutely the top reason for the white Christian evangelicals to mass exodus from his as supporters of his.
Oh yeah.
That one statement right there is so anti-gospel.
Of course.
It is. I mean, let's see. What's the opposite of
it's
godly?
It's anti-Christ.
What's the opposite of godly?
I'm not saying on the show right now Trump is the Antichrist, but he is anti-Christ.
What's the opposite? What's
Sorry.
the opposite of God?
Well,
Those
yeah.
are the words of Satan. I mean, honestly,
Could it be Satan?
those are the words of Satan. They are exactly the opposite of anything that's in the Bible.
Yep. And that was such a great skit. Remember that? That was the SNL glory days. Could it be Satan? Who was that? That was Harvey. Yeah.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about SNL, that's just gonna.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
are we weaving a theme?
yeah, it looks like we are. Defending
Well,
defending the fake news media. The fact that he even thinks that it needs to be looked into. Okay, so that
Right.
means we're going to
Well,
look into the First Amendment. We're going to look into that.
First of all, SNL is not news.
No. If you're getting your news from SNL, there's a problem.
They have a mock news setup
Yes.
in order to make fun of the news. It's not real news.
So are we going to...
Yes, SNL is absolutely fake news. You heard it here first, folks. SNL is fake news.
But it doesn't even matter. It's the First Amendment. You're going to look into it? You're going to look into a comedy show? Anyway, moving on.
Speaking of things that are really anti-biblical and anti-Christ.
No, I don't even know how to talk about this story. This is...
So,
oh my gosh.
Alex Acosta, Secretary of the Interior, is that what he is right now?
No, Secretary of Labor.
Okay, so Alex Acosta is the Secretary of Labor. Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah, it is.
Alex Acosta, Secretary of Labor and sweetheart criminal dealmaker, is reporting to work again today. And I think that everybody should remember that every day that he reports to work. He currently works for the federal government and is in charge of the Labor Department.
So your taxpayer dollars are paying his salary. And what is Alex Acosta now famous for?
Alex Acosta is extremely, he's becoming more and more infamous, I would say, for brokering a deal with a super rich Mr. Jeffrey Epstein, who is a known pedophilia
Pedophile.
Yeah, pedophile. That's where I was I was trying to go with pedophiliac, but that was like that's not right.
No.
No.
Pedophile.
That's like the attack that you have once you find a pedophile.
just add him to the list of a growing. I don't know. This administration seems to just attract pedophiles.
Well, he's a serial pedophile.
Yeah, proven.
Who preyed on young girls.
As young as 13.
As young as 13. And it was a 14-year-old that tipped everybody off, and investigators wrote up a very long and lengthy, I guess, pre-indictment they took to Acosta, who was the attorney in charge of the U.S. Attorney of Florida, and he brokered a deal to get Epstein basically all the way off the hook.
Yeah, well, he was basically charged with prostitution, and what came out this week from the Washington Post was that he specifically, the deal that Alex Acosta created for him was that he was charged with a girl of 16, and I guess in that state, 16 is the age of consent, so he wasn't even having to register as a sex offender, so he's scot-free right now somewhere, not even having to alert his community that he is a sex offender. He is a pedophile.
He's not a sex offender. He is a predator, is what he is.
Yes,
he is a predator.
Multiple victims, multiple girls, 13, 14, 15.
Many dozens of victims.
Just wrap your mind around that. And our present labor secretary, who still has his job, covered over for this guy and got it to where he doesn't have to he can avoid registering as so basically then you have enough money, you can pay and, be a pedophile, and you can assault multiple young girls, and, you got enough money though in this country. Heck, go ahead. I mean, I know people. And I've heard of stories where, you had someone who was 18 and their girlfriend was 17, and their parents were mad that they were together or whatever, and they got charged, and they have to register as a sex offender for the rest of their lives. But they're poor. They're not privileged.
Right,
exactly. And their rest of their life is ruined because now they're a sex offender because they were having, relations with someone who was 17, and somebody decided to report that. So that's the system. But then you have a guy like this out wandering around free to continue to do this.
Yeah, and live his high
because of
life.
Alex Acosta and a president who has appointed Alex Acosta, and now he's still in his position.
And you're paying for it.
And where's the outrage?
You're paying for it.
Any other administration, this is all you'd hear about for years. This would be absolutely encompassing. It would be, and now it's like what, 4th page news or something?
There is not currently a scarier story than this. This story is, to me, it's pointing to the direct, it's directly a result of our fantasization and fetishization of capitalists and being rich, and how being rich gets rid of all of your problems.
Privilege.
This is exactly why people think that. Mm-hmm. Because if you have enough money, you can assault. I've seen it as high as 80 girls. As high as 80 girls that are known victims. Not like the other ones that they couldn't find and the other girls that other girls talked about. Actual victims. Actual girls who were touched by this disgusting pedophile. And he's just got enough money, and he contributed to the right campaigns, and all of a sudden, the guy that brokered the deal with him is the labor secretary for the entire United States, and sits on the president's cabinet right next to him, the pussy grabber in chief, sitting right next to him, right next to the guy that protects pedophiles for a living. And your tax dollars paid for all of it.
Your outrage, if you are not outraged about this, but you're outraged about transgender bathrooms or transgender in the military or a gay wedding cake, or your outrage and your priorities are so skewed beyond belief. I don't even know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you except you need to repent. You need to get on your knees. You need to pray for God to help your heart and your mind and to see clearly, because this is evil. This is, and no more joking about could it be Satan. This is Satan. This is evil. There's nothing else to call this. Your outrage on the far-right Christian evangelicals that we're about to talk about in this new poll that apparently, I'm skipping ahead to our next story here, but apparently, white evangelicals, 69% are still supporting this president. Your outrage on everything is misplaced. Dreadfully. And you need to take a new look at priorities and values and just basic decency. I don't know what else to tell you.
If you're offended about transgender bathrooms and you're not offended about Jeffrey Epstein's actual actions, your offense offends me at that point.
Oh, greatly.
Because this man is
it enrages
confirmed
me
to have 80 actual victims of sexual assault that are underage. He is a predatory pedophile that deserves nothing but the bottom of the boot of this country and is beneath any of you and your outrage. And you have allowed the people that set him up on a pedestal because of his money to persuade you that you need to be upset about which toilet people use instead of this disgusting, vile human being. I don't even know if I want to call him a human being, who has ruined as many as 80 women, girls when he started, young girls when he started, probably almost all women by now, ruined their entire lives, stole everything from them.
And Alex Acosta
just got a promotion
as labor secretary, appointed by the President of the United States.
And you promoted him with your tax dollars. You promoted him with your vote. You continue to promote him.
This is what you're
with
supporting.
Your support.
This is what you're supporting. Yeah. So you know what? We just need to just visualize that. And, we just need to put that up in a giant billboard. This is what you're supporting. In this new poll, it says white evangelicals, which that's conservative white evangelicals. Let's make that caveat. According to the poll, still support Trump by 69%. Then this is why I say the headline of that should be white evangelicals have given up Jesus Christ for idolatry.
Yeah, and greed. And greed.
Well, that's really what idolatry is about. The golden calf. Back to the golden calf. I mean, at the expense of everything. So this is what you're supporting.
Yeah.
This is what you're supporting.
Let it just be known that Jeffrey Epstein is going home tonight, and Alex Acosta is serving in the United States government
on his 70,000 square foot farm ranch in New Mexico.
7,500 or 7,900 square foot ranch in square acre ranch in New Mexico. Yeah. He's going home tonight, and he's going to sleep in his own bed. Mm-hmm. And reality winner is in prison. Let that sink in.
Hey guys, this is John Pavlovitz, and you know the power of community. And for people who are seeking to follow Jesus in a way that isn't hateful, isn't exclusionary, community matters to us. And so I want to encourage you to take part in what CDA is doing and ChristianDems.org, to really plug in there and let yourself be encouraged and challenged and find people that you can go about doing the work of following Jesus in this world with.
This was great. I do feel like it's like a voice in the wilderness, but I also feel like people are listening.
People are listening, and people are listening in the places that you wouldn't necessarily think that they are.
Oh my gosh, I'm so thankful for the work that you're doing, the message that you're putting out there into the universe. All the best to you.
So the 2020 outlook, every week we're going to feature something else from a candidate. And last week we talked about Pete Buttigieg and his comments about Mike Pence. And Justin,
You got it right.
I knew you were
got
going
it
to do
right.
that. I'm getting a thumbs up in the studio because I said the last name correctly. Yeah. This week, Elizabeth Warren had a town hall on CNN, and I was really, really glad to hear someone asked her about her faith. And I really love what she said. And let's just play the clip so you can hear from her for herself.
Faith is very important to many people across the country. It's very important to many people in Mississippi. What role does faith play in your life, your public life and your private life?
So I was raised as a Methodist, and I was a 5th grade Sunday school teacher. All I can say is nobody got hurt. It was a low bar for being a 5th grade Sunday school teacher at our church. And I raised my children in the Methodist Church. What it is for me is the importance of the lessons we learn when we remember our values, when we remember our faith. The story for me is Matthew 26. And I'm sure some of you, a lot of you, know this story. You know, this is the one where the shepherd is dividing the world into the sheep and the goats. And as we all know, sheep are going to heaven, goats, nah, they're not. And the sheep ask him, why us? Why us, Lord? Why did you pick us? We look like those guys. And the shepherd, the Lord, answers back by saying, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me water. I was in prison and you visited me. Naked and you clothed me. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these, the least of thy brethren, ye have done it unto me. And what I hear in that is 2 things that guide me every day. The first is there is God. There is value in every single human being. Every single human being. And the second is that we are called to action. That passage is not about you had a good thought and held on to it. You sat back and were just a part of the, thought about good things. It does not say you just didn't hurt anybody and that's good enough. No, it says you saw something wrong. You saw somebody who was thirsty. You saw somebody who was in prison. You saw their face. You saw somebody who was hungry, and it moved you to act. I believe we are called on to it.
See, that towards the end there, she sounded like an evangelist. I tell you, she was just preaching. I mean, and the people there, it sounded like church. It was church. So I loved it. I loved what she said. And I don't know, she did mispronounce it. It was Matthew 25, but you're there in a live setting. That's going to happen. But I just thought at the end there, I mean, she was very passionate, and dare I say some anointing got in there, it sounded like she was preaching. But it's so great to hear someone talk about Matthew 25 and talk about the truth of what faith is supposed to be and how it's supposed to be in action in government. That's the role. It's not to, as we've been talking about, and we're going to be talking today with Terry Heaton about Christian Dominionism and continuing that discussion. That's not faith. That's not how faith is supposed to be in action in government. It's supposed to be just what Elizabeth Warren said. It informs our values, and those values then inform our action, which is taking care of the least of these and looking out for each other and loving each other. So I thought that she summarized that really well.
I think she did too, and I've seen some people dragging her for, this is not Matthew 26, it's Matthew 25, and I'm like,
you make a mistake.
we can
make mistakes.
Well, we can get into whether or not that matters, but I think what let's not miss the forest because we're studying trees. You know, let's take it for what it actually is, which is the overview of what she was pulling off the top of her head, which is an actual story, an actual biblical story that we all know. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most important times that Jesus spoke.
Yes. And
for her to be able to pull that out and apply it in today's terms, and seemingly inspire some of the people there.
Yes.
Which is
there were some Christian Democrats in that crowd that were excited.
It sure sounded like
to hear it. Yes, yes, absolutely.
And I one thing that I find really, really interesting is that Democrats, like historically over the last several decades, really have shied away from talking too much about their personal religions and things, mm-hmm. when that is obviously clearly not what the population is thirsting for.
And that's not what they should be doing. So in doing that, they've allowed the Republican Party to become the quote God party, and to take that over.
To have the Christian title.
Yeah, they've got to stop doing it. They've got to embrace.
Which tags back to what we were just talking about. So now they've allowed the other party to align themselves with Christianity, or seemingly Christianity. Mm-hmm. If you were to take some of the religious right leaders that we have here and drop them in another country and let them start preaching their crap, they would get ran out of the building.
Ran out of town.
Ran out of the building because they would be like, "You're a heretic. Get out of here."
No, Elizabeth Warren's take on how faith applies to public service is much more in line with the truth of the gospel than anything I've seen. I think one of the tweets I said is anything I've seen from any of the Republican primaries, in 2016 that we saw up on stage and their application of faith. What she just gave is much more. So yeah, that was good. It's good to hear something.
Well, that brings up my actual point of noticing that was this was a question posed in a town hall setting. I would rather know these things from a candidate up front. You know, I don't want to have to extract their religion from them. I don't want to have to extract whether or not they believe what I believe or whatever. And it's not really even about the beliefs. It's about it. In my opinion, it sets off this. It gives this sort of waft of fear from the candidate when they're unwilling to, in the beginning, say, "I'm Christian. I'm a Democrat. This is why." And what it's doing is it's allowing the right to have the microphone to those people, and it's making them look like they're afraid of their religion.
That's true, and it's happened for a long time. And I know that part of it is this sort of fear of doing what the right has done and exploiting religion, which is more of a. As Christians, you're not supposed to be like the Pharisees, showing off your faith out in front of everybody. That Jesus said, don't even pray out in front of everyone and show off your lofty prayers and wear your long tassels and, parade around like peacocks. But it's a fine line there. So I understand where they're coming from, where I think they're coming from, but they can't be shy about using the microphone. Because the other side is twisting the microphone. We're going to hear a lot more about that with Terry Heaton, which is coming right up soon.
Devin Nunes, elected congressman and new Trump Tower mascot, has filed a lawsuit claiming that people were mean to him on Twitter. Yes, Devin Nunes.
How sad.
Is suing Twitter, and specifically two accounts. One of them is named @Devin Nunes' mom, and the other is @Devin Nunes' cow. Who the latter just posted this morning that Devin is, quote, milking it.
Well, what? Does he have a cow or something? Is he? What?
I don't even know.
What the heck?
These are obviously and very clearly parody accounts. However, they were very critical of Devin Nunes. And assuming that this lawsuit is allowed to move forward, the discovery process is going to be very interesting. Because the things that they were critical of Devin Nunes for may be confidential and protected under the House rules. So it will be very interesting to see which way this goes and if there's a discovery going to be allowed. I'm assuming that the judge is going to laugh and throw this suit out. But let's see what happens. Watch this space.
Watch this space. What a snowflake! I tell you, those guys on the far right and the Trump cabinet, Trump and his cabinet, boy.
Yeah, they have one feeling, and it's outrage. And when they feel something other than outrage, they sue.
They hurt his feelings.
Yeah,
and his cow's feelings, I guess.
No, the cows. And if you haven't read any of the parody tweets, you should, because they are quite funny. If this works, like, heck, we could have brought lawsuit with Christian Democrats years ago. Gosh.
I mean, the things I've been told to do to myself and that CDA has been told to do
and accused of
has been, and accused of, like, I can't read them on air because
they're libelous.
We do not have a maturity rating here on our podcast. Right. I can't read them on air. That's how bad they are. So, wow. Yeah, he's silly. Oh my goodness, he's silly.
The forces of evil will lie, cheat, steal, even inflict physical harm if they believe it will silence and shut up Christian conservatives. In an interview, Moore said the allegations against him are a smear by people who, quote, don't want to hear the truths about God and about the Constitution.
Are you supposed to be a priest or something? Are you supposed to be a priest?
I want to emphasize from the outset that I believe that we have far more critical issues in the 1960 campaign. The hungry children I saw in West Virginia, the old people who cannot pay their doctor's bills, the families forced to give up their farms, an America with too many slums, with too few schools, and they are not religious issues. For war and hunger and ignorance and despair, no religious barrier. I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source.
So last week, there was a news story on the Rachel Maddow show about girls being forced to give birth in immigration camps. It's a whole report. The ACLU is involved, where basically the government is tracking young girls' pregnancies, even menstrual cycles, and trying to force them to give birth after they've been raped. So right now, this is something where, we've been talking about dominionism on the show. On episodes 31 and 33, we've been doing a deep dive into what dominionism is, what's the plan. And something I tweeted after that story is that people should understand this is all part of a larger dominionism plan. And it just goes right in line with really their theology and what they want to do. So now I want to introduce Terry Heaton, the author of The Gospel of Self, How Pat Robertson Stole the Soul of the GOP. And you may remember us quoting from episode 33 some of Terry's book. So we are very happy to have Terry on the podcast today to discuss all of this. Thanks for being with us again, Terry.
Well, thanks for having me back. I'm glad to be here because I just wanted to say up front that I think you guys are doing a terrific job. I especially enjoy your little scripture-based tweets and Facebook posts. I mean, I know you're doing a lot more than that, but those, it seems to me, are highly effective, and I congratulate you for doing that because it's just something you never hear or read anywhere, and that is a viewpoint that's opposed to what all these right-wing dominionists and others would have us think is the truth. So I really appreciate that from you and think you guys are doing a great job, and I want to encourage you to just continue the fight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is important to have the truth of Scripture out there now more than ever. And
absolutely.
Yeah, so it is something very important. So just leading off on that story I opened with, and I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but, about girls, basically, this is just one aspect. It's just one story. But what we're trying to do is break down what the Dominionism wing of the Republican Party or Christian Dominionists of the extreme, what their end game is and what they're trying to do. And I felt like this story was an example of something that would have come down. This was a pro-life, quote, pro-life extremist who was basically put in charge of these various camps, from what I remember of the story. And
the refugee resettlement.
The refugee resettlement camps, yeah. And so because of his theology on the extreme of the pro-life movement, he basically decided that, even though these girls had been raped and they were pregnant and they wanted an abortion, and legally they had that right, they were in the United States, that was a legal right for them, to basically block them. In some cases, they were even locked in their rooms and prohibited from leaving in order to block that, and also tracking even their menstrual cycles, tracking their pregnancies, keeping this document. It was all very bizarre. Do you feel like that's something that is am I right to say that's something that's a direct result of this Christian Dominionism infiltrating into political, basically it's not even politics, it's into policy?
Right, it's social engineering. I have no problem with connecting this to dominionism, as it were. I think that, once you cross that bridge, everything else is open to interpretation. So, the duty that we have, it seems to me, is to get people off that damn bridge or to destroy it altogether. Or we're going to keep hearing more bizarre, more wild, and more unimaginable things, honestly, that flow from the idea that man should and rightly has dominion over everything. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Pat Robertson's kind of his seminal book that was published before he ran for president was called The Secret Kingdom. And this book caused me and a few of my associates at CBN some difficulty, because here he was saying that these items that he threw out there in this book are laws, very much like the laws of nature. So these are infallible laws of the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God being the secret kingdom, because it exists beyond the sun, I guess is the way I say it. Ecclesiastes is all about life under the sun. And, I'm interested in that especially, but also in things beyond the sun. So in the Secret Kingdom, Pat is saying that there is this kingdom of God that exists in the here and now. And these principles that he articulates are laws of that kingdom. So that's quite a bit to swallow for anybody with a rational sense. And, I remember having many discussions with a few people in the ministry who had a problem with this particular book. The eighth law of Pat's kingdom is the law of dominion. And, it's an interesting read in light of, the kinds of things you guys are talking about. So let me just read you a couple of things from this, and I think you'll find it pretty interesting.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, this is Pat Robertson speaking, or writing through this book. This is from page 203 of The Secret Kingdom. When man, through Jesus, reasserts God's dominion over himself, then he is capable of reasserting his God-given dominion over everything else. That is the way everything on earth will be freed from the cycle of despair, cruelty, bondage, and death. I furthermore believe the Lord would have man subdue the natural forces in the universe. Jesus, who was our example as well as our Redeemer, did this, as we have discussed in earlier chapters. Without in any way advocating fanaticism, which is a clever way of saying I'm about to give you some fanaticism.
Yeah.
So without in any way advocating fanaticism, I believe God would enable man under his sovereignty to deal successfully with the conditions that threaten the world with catastrophic earthquakes. Scripture makes plain that God uses natural disasters as judgment upon mankind, but I am convinced that were man to turn from his wicked ways and seek the Lord, he would be able to take dominion over the faults in the earth's structure and render them harmless. For the words of Jesus spoken to the tumultuous waters of Galilee still echo down through history with great power and authority. Peace, be still. Similarly, man taking his rightful place under God would subdue the causes of drought and famine. World hunger would cease. So,
you know what else stops hunger? Giving people food.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Which is what Jesus told us to do. Feeding the hungry was a big part of, kind of what he was doing back in the day.
Yeah, but you wouldn't need, people to do that if the sinners would just, take up their own crosses and, and do what they should be doing in the first place, which is not taking charity. I mean, to me, wow. It's really ridiculous to hear that, but that's what's behind the belief. It's like, I
think it's probably the most galling thing I have ever heard from a man that has built his entire empire off of the donations of other people to tell people not to accept charity is the biggest hypocritical thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well, it's when this stuff it's this stuff gone to seed. When you start following the tape, or letting the tape play out, which is kind of a metaphor for following a thought downstream. You come to the place where you will believe almost anything, and it is all covered with such remarkable calm and full logic. For example, the saying that all of these people use is, give a man a fish and you fed him for a day. teach a man to fish and he'll be fed for a lifetime. And so within the parameters of that particular, parable or proverb, they justify anything because in the name of teaching people to fish. So in other words, poor people, this message in their minds is directed at poor people.
Yeah.
Because are you going to just sit there and take the fish that people give you, or are you going to go out there and learn how to fish? So the responsibility is transferred back to the individual. And that's the essence, to be honest with you, of dominionism.
Which on itself, that's a great thing. You help someone to have a sustainable income. You have jobs programs. All of those are great things. But this is like twisting everything on its head in order to somehow blame the poor for being poor and say that they're sinners because they're poor. That's what I'm getting out of that.
Just be rich, stupid.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, you're a sinner, and the reason you're poor is because you're a sinner, and basically making then some kind of a pseudo-political philosophy out of that is rewarding and bolstering the rich, which is the total opposite of what Jesus did, right?
Right, but I think my point is that guys like Pat Robertson, guys like Franklin Graham Jr. and Jerry Falwell Jr., they don't know how to fish. What they've done is they've taught a rich man to tithe.
Right.
That's what they've done.
Which is, just doubling up on the hypocrisy of it. But you have to twist yourself into some real, what you're describing there, that's you've got to really twist yourself into a theological pretzel to get at that conclusion.
But you can imagine people reading that kind of stuff from Pat.
Yeah.
And saying, boy, I got to get me some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And, because it very much appeals to the self.
The flesh.
Who doesn't want to have dominion?
Right.
Good Lord, I don't have dominion over my dog.
Right.
I don't either. I'm with you there.
Come on. So
it's like it's really what it is attracting that pride. It's going after folks' pride, greed, really hitting at those.
Right. It's the gospel of self.
It's the gospel of self. Right.
It's again the layers that Pat presented as ways to make money or to increase donations is to present the message so that people can find out how it helps me, how it helps my family, how it helps my neighborhood, how it helps my community, how it helps my state, how it helps my nation, and at the bottom of the list, how does it help somebody else? Mm-hmm. It's also the same kind of thinking that says it's entirely rational to transfer welfare from the poor to the rich.
It's really interesting that you brought that up today, because I was just scrolling through my Twitter timeline, and I had just recently done some work with some MLB teams, and I had been thinking about these huge contracts. Bryce Harper just signed a huge contract, and now Mike Trout just topped that contract, and they're both the biggest contracts in sports, and they are both for the amount of money that it would cost to build a stadium, while owners are getting taxpayers to pay for stadiums.
Right.
And it's exactly what you're talking about. We're socializing the costs for the wealthy by having taxpayers pay for the biggest expense that a team would have, which would be their stadium, and then they're maximizing their profits in order to maximize these other contracts and keep these moneymakers around for years to come.
Yes, but what's kept in parentheses in the whole dominionism argument, especially as it relates to the rich, is that these people, with more money to give to charitable causes, will feed their coffers. So that's never discussed in any of this. And yet, that's, I'm telling you, at the very center of why the right-wing Christians support the wealthy. And, because many of them are their biggest givers, and they would not want to do anything that would, hurt in any way their ability to get huge donations from the wealthy. And it's so sleazy. I mean, honestly, that's the only word I can come up with. It's so sleazy what's going on in our world today. It's just, with the people who are supposedly in charge.
It's almost like, well, it is. It's prostituting the gospel. It's prostitution is what it is. It's just,
right.
It's not, because it's nothing to do with a real genuine teaching of the gospel or principles at all. It's all about, like you say, self and really prostitution. I mean, so we did read some quotes from your book in episode 33, and we talked about the shadow government that you talk about, Pat Robertson, wanting to set up. And, like the story we led with, and there are so many stories since Trump has become president, especially, that we can point to in looking at what seems to be a shadow government in operation, and that it's here, and they're at every level of government. I was interested what you thought about that. Do you think that, as Pat Robertson had intended back in the 80s, setting up a shadow government, do you think that that's in operation?
Absolutely. I mean, I could not. Pardon me?
In whole or in part?
Oh, I think it would be giving them too much credit to say in whole. I would say certainly in part.
They'd probably want somebody a little bit more pliable than Donald Trump as the president.
Right.
I can see that.
I think. The last time we spoke, I think I used Sarah Palin as a great example of this shadow government, because she went in, I think it was it school board first, and she got her feet wet at the local level, and then moved on to state. And she was charismatic enough to, pull all of that off, and then become very close to the vice presidency. I mean, that's what I mean. I mean, you look around, at least where I live anyway, and granted, I live in the Bible Belt. You may not see it there, but around here, it's plenty obvious. I mean, there was a guy who ran for, let's see, I think it was lieutenant governor last fall, and won. And the first thing in his television commercials was his belief in the Bible and in basically dominionism, and that was the first thing that his ads featured about him, and he won. You have to look at all these local governments and see who's, who exactly are the members of the county commission, the city council, the school board, and all of those feeders into, state legislatures and then on up, because that was the plan for the shadow government. So I think that is evident almost everywhere.
And some of the extreme positions that the Trump administration has taken, which I think, were really surprising to some people, because he wasn't, he's by no means some kind of religious, figure, right. And he's not, but he's a puppet. And so to the transgender military ban was something that took a lot of people by shock and surprise, but not so much me, because Mike Pence is in there. and they're wanting to keep the far right pleased. And I felt that's a definite coming down from a shadow government or a dominionist theology,
right,
to keep that wing happy, I thought.
Well, you got to think that sooner or later, people are going to become aware of this. And, I mean, I have, entertaining friends on Facebook, including some that are way over the line as a part of the whole, Trump thing. And, I'm still astonished today that with all the evidence in front of them, they will still say the same things about Donald Trump. And a lot of it flows from religious zealotry. That to me is unmistakable. And, so it's a big problem, but it's, fortunately so far for us, it's not, it's not big enough that we're going to have to, take up arms against it. And I think that the 2020 is probably the most critical presidential or election season that we're going to have ever experienced in the United States. What happens after 2020 is entirely dependent on what happens in 2020. And, I'm a little bit nervous about it because I don't necessarily see, Trump's opponents making a lot of really healthy moves with regards to taking the country back. I think many people see it as an opportunity to go completely on the other side. And I'm not sure that's what, that the pendulum of the United States can be swung that speedily. And, whether that's even advisable. I just don't know yet. I haven't seen enough or heard enough, so far. I do find it astonishing that that Trump remains, and we talked about this last time I was on. I still can't believe that he's, permitted, if, for lack of a better word, to just rave on Twitter the way he does. I just can't imagine that, being allowed to continue, and yet it is.
With keeping majority support from Republicans and even from white evangelicals, still
right.
Keeping a majority of support with everything.
Right.
And I think that has to come down from the influence. And to me, a shadow government just doesn't mean just government. I mean, this is where there's influence and there's control in the churches, and there's money flowing, and like we were saying, and there's purpose there, and in mega churches, and you see, and in Christian media, which is run mostly, especially talk radio and any kind of Christian media, is pretty much run from a extreme, a general Christian, a Christian like me is not accepted. A Christian like, my father, who's a pastor, is not accepted. So it's still a very, very exclusive, exclusionary brand of, quote, Christianity. And that is pushing these messages, and people who aren't in those circles don't understand, like the forwards, the emails, the Facebook posts, the peer pressure, the religious peer pressure, the community that's surrounding this. These people are hearing this brainwashing from every angle and every side. So unless they get to know the Bible and Jesus for themselves and stop listening to the voices around, they're just not going to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And this is going to continue.
I think that, to me, the thing that will, that has to make sense to these people is if we just keep pouring on the idea that this party represents the wealthy and has nothing to do with them. I was taught as a young man that the GOP was the silk stockings. And I love that term. I think it just speaks loudly to the difference between us and them. And to be able to historically show that the silk stockings, despite the French and their noblesse oblige, they are not in it for the same reasons that we are. And that if those less intelligent members of the Christian right were to ever become aware of that, I think it may, in fact, usher back in the age of a new age of the Blue Dog Democrats, or some group with certain essential conservative notions, but not run all the way out to the right as we did with it at CBN. So I think there is hope, and
that's good to hear.
I do.
That's great.
That's the one thing that baffles me, is that how do you get people to vote with the party that works against them?
Yeah,
that's a real trick, and it requires something like religion.
It's amazing, yeah.
And and certainly high on that list would be abortion, and the way it's been turned into something that it isn't.
Yeah.
That every line you hear from the right on this extends so far out into the ridiculous. Like we're now lobbying abortionists in with the same thinking as those who favor infanticide. That it's tantamount to the same thing.
Yeah.
And and this whole idea of according to this law, you can have an abortion the day before your due date.
Yeah.
Well, that's called a C-section. But again, the language is what is so interesting to me, because if you ever pin these people down, or ever are in a position where you can, it's just arguing language, essentially.
Totally. No, it's propaganda. Yeah, it's a propaganda
absolutely.
machine. Well, so what? Final question for you. What's their end game? The Christian Dominionist movement, the shadow government, all of it. What's their end game?
Well, it's, what other political end game is there than to run everything? Because if you're the people who are running everything, then things are going to go well or better with you than those who are on your receiving end. So, it's entirely self-centered. So, if the end, I don't know what to tell you about what the end game means for the rest of us, but I think it's pretty awful. And
if they have their way and we're able to obtain complete control,
right.
Absolutely.
I honestly think we would have civil war before that.
It would be quite frightening.
Right.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Terry Heaton's book is The Gospel of Self: How Pat Robertson Stole the Soul of the GOP, and they can find that anywhere, Amazon,
right,
wherever, right?
And even bookstores.
And bookstores. Awesome.
Right.
So check it out. And thank you so much for joining us. And come back again, please, Terry.
Thank you. Anytime.
To talk more about this, because this is it's important conversation, and you have a lot of insight that you add to the topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Take no prisoners, guys.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The church I led worship for this past Sunday, Foothills Christian Center in Phoenix, shared this, and I absolutely loved it. It was talking about the New Zealand attack and perfectly summarizing the common thread throughout Scripture that goes far too often unrecognized. The Bible is clear. Moabites are bad. They were not to be allowed to dwell among God's people, Deuteronomy 23. But then comes the story of Ruth the Moabite, which challenges the prejudice against Moabites. The Bible is clear. The people from Uz are evil, Jeremiah 25. But then comes the story of Job, a man from Uz, who was the most blameless man on earth. The Bible is clear. No foreigners or eunuchs allowed, Deuteronomy 23. But then comes the story of an African eunuch welcomed into the church, Acts 8. The Bible is clear. God's people hated Samaritans. But then Jesus tells a story that shows not all Samaritans were bad. So the story may begin with prejudice, discrimination, and animosity, but the Spirit moves God's people toward openness, welcome, inclusion, acceptance, and affirmation. So the religious right and Trump-supporting Christians, including Mike Pence and all those we've been talking about on this podcast, would do well to read the book instead of getting it autographed. And that's all for now. Join us next week at the place where real Christian values meets politics.
Judgment without compassion. Then spend millions of dollars and use hundreds of hours that could be used to counsel, help, give clothes, aid, or food. Jesus loved to make the sinners, cared for the sick, preached against the hypocrites, whitewashed tombs. What are your values? Is one hatred? Is one verbal abuse? 'Cause you don't like them. Well, I've seen too much and I've had enough. It's an abomination to use God's word without love. Tell me, what would Jesus say? What are his And it's not about sin. Who's done more right, who's done more wrong. He doesn't see us, 'cause who's better than who? It's a relationship, full surrender to a loving